Before we get started, we'll start in a few minutes. We'll start with acknowledging the country that we're on, but in the meantime, we would love to invite you to type into the chat which country you're logging in from, and then we'll just get started straight after that. Hi, Linda. Hello, Howard. All right, let's get started. We would like to get started by acknowledging the Gadigal people, the traditional owners of the land on which Total Environment Center normally meets, and pay our respects to elders past and present. I extend that respect today to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples that are joining this webinar. As we're gathering from different parts of Australia, Total Environment Center acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connection to land, sea, and community. While Total Environment Center recognizes and has defended these important environmental connections in communities across this land since 1972, we acknowledge and show gratitude to the ongoing protection that traditional custodians have provided for tens of thousands of years. Today's webinar is presented by Total Environment Center. My name is Mares, and I recently joined the Total Environment Center as its new Deputy Director. Thank you so much for attending today. Total Environment Center has been fighting for the environment for almost 50 years with more than 100 successful campaigns, of which this green energy campaign is one. In this campaign, we work on democratizing the grid and combating climate change by lobbying for renewable energy sources. Before I introduce our speakers, I just wanted to cover a few housekeeping topics. Just so you're aware, today's webinar is recorded because we received a few requests for people to view it later on. We'll share a link with you after the event is complete and welcome you to revisit the content later, plus share it with anybody who would be interested or would have questions. If you prefer not to be recorded, you're more than welcome to turn your video off. But we would love it if you could keep your video on throughout the webinar. We would also like to ask you to keep your audio muted, as that will cause least disturbance during the webinar. And then, as Lisa mentioned in the chat, you're more than welcome to put your questions in the chat at any time. She will be asking them to Mark throughout the presentation, and we will have plenty of time to answer those questions. I would like to ask you to put the questions in the chat to everyone rather than sending a private message to the host, because that way we might have duplicate questions and it might be a little bit harder to answer them. If you are not sure how to use the chat, that's all included in the email that you would have received with the link to the webinar, so you can always refer back to that. And then now I would like to introduce to you our speakers. Dr. Mark Byrne, is the Total Environment Center energy market advocate and is passionate about the role of distributed energy resources like solar, batteries, and demand response, especially in making the energy system resilient to accelerating impacts of climate change. He has been lobbying for energy market reforms for more than a decade, and we're excited to have him here today. But first, I'm going to pass over to Total Environment Center's Director, Jeff Angel. Jeff has been the fearless leader of the Total Environment Center for the larger part of 50 years and is an expert in a wide range of issues, including protecting forests and the endangered species that inhabit them, renewable energy, waste reduction, and plastic pollution. With a wealth of knowledge, there really is no one better to get us started. And with that, I would like to pass it over to Jeff.
Thank you very much, Marias, and welcome everybody. As we're all profoundly aware, global warming is the biggest challenge for the planet. It's the biggest challenge for nations. and it's the biggest challenge for all of us as individuals and consumers. It's a massive job, and the environment movement, as well as many other stakeholders in society and the economy, are working very hard. TEC has chosen some strategic areas where we think we can make a difference. One of those, which we inflict on Mark, is to engage with the national electricity market. It's an incredibly obscure, rule-based Byzantine type arrangement and architecture, but it is absolutely crucial and at the heart of Australia's energy system. In the last few years, we've worked very hard to get in place energy efficiency, also called demand management, and to get the market to have a central preoccupation with not generating more electricity, but in fact to use less, and encourage that through a variety of financial and rule-based instruments. The main topic for today is about solar energy. I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, are generating solar energy on your roofs. And as we've seen in the last few years, solar power has moved from being a boutique exercise to the mainstream. And that has changed the need for how to integrate solar power generation, particularly from households, into the national electricity market. And Mark has been doing an enormous amount of excellent work. TEC is the only green NGO that has a type of official status inside the rule-making arrangements. And of course, we also like to keep everyone aware of what we're doing because, as I said, it sounds obscure, but it's unbelievably important. So thank you again, and I'll pass over to Mark.
Great. Thanks for the introduction, Jeff and Marius. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, good. All right. Welcome from Dunghutti country on the usually bucolic mid-north coast of New South Wales when it's not ablaze or in flood or, as it was this time last week, raining hail on my partner's new electric car. But anyway, apart from that, it's great. So I have to start with a confession, and that is I don't like lecturing much. I'd much rather have a conversation. So I'm going to do the absolute minimum amount of talking. I've got a bunch of slides, but we can whip through them hopefully fairly quickly in a couple of batches. And really what I want to do is just present enough to get the discussion and the questions going and take it from there as much as possible. So let's start with the slides, please, Marius. Thanks. That's our logo with 4 parts reduced, as in the amount of stuff you consume and that's going to pump greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Decarbonise, likewise. Localise, we're very keen on local energy because it's renewable, because it's cheap, and because it helps to foster a sense of community. And then electrify is part of what we call the electrification of everything, the trend towards an increasingly electric society. And we're big fans of that, especially if it means getting off gas. Before we get into the main topic for tonight, I thought we have to have a nod to where we're at in history, and especially the fact that we're only a few days away from COP26 in Glasgow. So next slide, please. We've got a screenshot from the COP26 website. Basically, I mean, I don't want to kind of put down the Australian government. It's doing a pretty good job of ridiculing itself as it goes. And there's not much constructive to say about it. I would just quote from the Climate Council recent report where they said, where are we? There we go. The science demands that Australia reduce its emissions by 75% below 2005 levels by 2030 and achieve net zero by 2035. So 2050 is irrelevant at this point. It's all about what we have to do to get well on the way to net zero in the next 10 years to avoid crossing that threshold of more than 1.5 degrees of warming over pre-industrial levels. And unfortunately, the COP26 website is a little ambiguous on that. It wants ambitious 2030 emissions reductions targets that align with reaching net zero by the middle of the century. Well, that's really not the main game. It's pretty unfortunate wording. So it's no wonder that some politicians can kind of feed off that confusion and sometimes misinformation. Anyway, we hope COP26 goes well. Next slide, please. So we all know what's happening on the left-hand side of that, the left-hand graph there, which is cumulative carbon dioxide emissions in the global atmosphere rising inexorably. It even rose last year during the peak of COVID, but rose less than normal. And now it's kind of accelerating again as we get back to business as usual. However, the graph on the right side is emissions from the electricity sector in Australia. And amazingly, it's showing a decline since about 2010. And it's one of the only two sectors in Australia that's shown a decline over that period. The other one being land use because of slightly stricter land clearing legislation, especially in New South Wales and Queensland. But the two main drivers of that reduction in emissions in the electricity sector in Australia have been the Labor Party's carbon price between 2012 and 2014. That's a big dip in the middle. And then since then, the impact of the renewable energy target in driving significant investment in large and small scale solar and large wind farms, none of which the current federal government can take any credit for. So it's a relatively good news story, but if we go to the next slide, you'll see some of the work that we've still got to do. This is a day in the life of the national electricity market as seen through the eyes of different generation types. So if we go from the bottom to the top, it starts about 11 o'clock in the morning one day and goes to 11 o'clock in the morning the next day. If we start from the bottom up, we've got brown coal, then black coal, then two forms of gas, then the blue is hydro, the green is wind farms, the dark yellow is large-scale solar, and the light yellow is small-scale solar, most of which, but not all of which, is behind the meter or on-site, not necessarily exported to the grid. So when I started this work a decade ago, about 90% of the generation in the national electricity market, the NEM, was fossil fuel, coal and gas. At the moment, it's about 70% coal and I think between somewhere around 6 or 7% gas. So we've made a significant improvement, but at this rate, it'll be 2050 before we get rid of all of our fossil fuel generation even in the NEM. And we're one of the best sectors of the economy. So we've really got a long way to go. Next slide, please. What we do is work on one part of the energy transition. So there's two main aspects to the energy transition, which is kind of a once in a century transformation of the whole way we deliver energy. The first one is the move from large fossil fuel based generators a long way away from most consumers, and the consumers were relatively passive and just kind of took what they were given. And that's obviously changing with the move to more solar and wind farms. But the other big change is a change from centralised to decentralised generation. And in Australia, that's been driven by the fantastic uptake of rooftop solar, which has declined in price by about 90% over the last decade. It's been a really good news story. And it's given rise to not only a lot of people supplying their own power and perhaps storing it, perhaps increasingly they'll be able to trade it as well. But there's also this kind of middle realm in the bottom of the graphic. On the distribution network, outside of individual homes, in the network, we have things like microgrids, community batteries, sharing of electric vehicle energy and solar gardens. So there's significant opportunities there for communities as well as individual households and small businesses to get involved in the energy transition and to control the way that they supply and manage their own energy supply. And that's where TEC is active. Next slide, please. So just a word about how we're funded. We're funded by Energy Consumers Australia, which can't quite read that, but calls itself the National Voice for Residential and Small Business something.
Energy consumers.
Thanks.
Small
I've got it
business
on a
energy
small
consumers.
screen.
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
I can read the next bit, Mark. Like it says, we work to
That's
ensure
okay.
their values, expectations.
Don't worry. They were set up in 2015 and are funded out of your bills. So Energy Consumers Australia gets about $5 million a year. So it's about 50 cents from everyone's bills. And about half of this goes to their own work and the other half goes to advocacy. And TEC has been a receiver of that, of an advocacy grant every year since its inception. And we got them from the body that preceded ECA as far back as 2004. So we're one of the longest running organisations to work in the energy sector. But I just wanted to put that up there. We've got the purpose of the grant program there and the titles of our two grants, just to kind of explain the kind of quirky, as Jeff implied, realm that we're in. We're not paid to do climate campaigning. We're paid to work on the reform of the national electricity market to further the long-term interests of consumers, which are very narrowly defined. They don't include sustainability. They don't include affordability, strangely enough. So they're very narrow technical and economic criteria, which we have to work around, but we have to do that in a way that complies with the funding arrangements. So we are quite constrained in what we can work on. And with something like climate change, we have to kind of bring that sort of stuff in through the back door, although the landscape is changing fairly rapidly and we can be more upfront about it than we used to be. Okay, that's all the background. Lisa, have we got any questions or comments yet?
So no new questions in the chat that I can see it, and none that Alex has popped into the chart there. But I'll just give people a moment to have a think now that they've heard your presentation at the beginning of.
Sure.
Please pop your questions in the chat if you've got a question for Mark, and I would love to pass them on so we can have a good conversation. So I found that graph with the 24 hours of where the energy comes from very interesting, Mark, with the brown coal, black coal. I think it was, what was the blue there? Yeah, so you've got this blue
hydro.
Yeah.
And
so that's 24 hours. It'll be interesting to see how that changed, to 10 years ago, or how that mix has changed. And so you've got all that solar, obviously, around the middle of the day until the late afternoon, and then it's nighttime in the middle of that picture, and then it starts again in the morning. So interesting way of showing it.
Given the most of the light yellow is behind the meter, that's the expression we use, but it's not sent into the market. The peak demand is kind of about a third of the way in. It's around 5 or 6 p.m. And at that point, solar has pretty much disappeared. So this is the major problem with rooftop and, not quite so much grid scale solar, is everyone gets a solar system and the installer says, oh, we'll put it facing north because that's where you're going to get the best output. But unless you're home to use it, or unless you're getting a really good feed-in tariff, it's not the best way to orient your solar anymore. And I'm sure we'll get back to that.
I've got two questions coming now, Mark. So John's asking what percentage of Australians have smart meters?
Everyone in Victoria, and not a great number outside, probably about 25% outside Victoria so far.
Okay.
It's rolling out fairly slowly.
And I think it was Cynthia. Here is it. Whoops, they're coming in now. So sorry, there's a question about, we have 4.5 kilowatts of photovoltaic panels. Is it time now for us to include a battery? And would that be better for us and the system?
Okay, can we park that one and come back to it?
Yep, yep.
Basically, batteries are good if you want to store your solar, but they won't pay for themselves in most cases.
Okay. Yep. So even the savings that you make by using your battery at night is not going to recoup the cost?
No.
No. Okay. So, okay. Whoops. Now that's already another question here about climate crisis. I need it. Climate action mask. Feel free to visit this website, Climate Action Crisis. Thanks. It's Paul. Everybody can see these questions as well. So feel free, if it's a question that you also want to comment on, you can interact with each other. I would love to all be in a room together, but we'll make the most of it. So we've got a shared link there about climate change protests. So what is on the ABC News, Southwest Bargo expansion to colliery mining is having a serious, so we're going some good sharing about like what's happening in terms of climate change and climate actions that are needed. I'm wondering, is there any other, we've got this might be another question for later too, Mark, electric vehicles and battery storage. Why are there hardly any vehicles with software that allows reverse flow to the home or grid? That's from Linda. Is that one you'd like to answer later?
One of my absolute favourite topics, so we will definitely get back to that.
Great. Okay, so hold on, Linda. We'll get back to you. Okay. Well, I think we've explored. Yeah, we'll let you get on with the next part of the presentation.
So on to the solar exports rule change that has been recently completed. I just want to give you a little bit of a history lesson because TEC has some history in this space. So on the left, you'll see the front page of a discussion paper we put out a couple of years ago, basically arguing that we shouldn't be charging solar owners to export to the grid. On the right side, you've got a rule change request that we put in about 18 months after that with ACOSS, the peak welfare body in the nation, arguing that we should. So I need to explain what happened. The concern for welfare groups has always been that there's been a cross-subsidy from non-solar to solar owners because solar owners are not using nearly as much energy from the grid, so they're not paying for as much of the grid uptake, but they're still, on the one hand, creating demand in the evening peaks, which is what really drives network investment, and also they're causing technical problems on the grid, and I'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes. And in that first paper, I argued that yes, there is a cross-subsidy issue, and yes, there are technical issues, but that they were fairly minor and that the time was not yet ripe to start thinking about charging for exports. 18 months later, we changed our tune for two main reasons. One is that I work quite closely with the rule maker, the AEMC, and the regulator and the market operator. And I could see that they were all changing their tunes and we were going to be much more sympathetic to the view of welfare groups, and that we were therefore much more likely than I had previously expected to get some kind of change to the status quo. And the main thing in the status quo that was at play here was a prohibition in the rules against networks charging for the export of energy to the grid. And there was a lot of pressure to get rid of it and just get rid of it and do nothing else. And eventually we decided that it was better to be kind of inside the tent and be having a seat at the top table and be driving the shape of these reforms because they were going to happen whether we oppose them or not. So that's what we did. But the other main reason why we wanted to get involved on the front foot was that I could see that there were going to be advantages for solar owners. So especially in Victoria, there are tens of thousands of solar owners now who are told they can't export anything to the grid because the grid locally is just full up. Well, that's what the network says. And we have to take their word for it because there's no kind of independent assessment of this sort of metric. And even in other parts of Australia, if you did get some exports, you were getting often 3 kilowatts, sometimes 5, but often 3 kilowatts export. And the average system size now being installed is around 7 point something, between 7 and 8 kilowatts. So there's a massive amount of solar energy that was just going to waste because most people don't use most of their solar during the day. And they often, rightly or wrongly, bought their systems assuming they would get a good feed-in tariff for their exports during the middle of the day. That's changing now, not only because of this rule change, but because the wholesale market has reacted to the glut of solar energy in the middle of the day by reducing the value of it. And now you're lucky to get more than 5 cents a kilowatt hour, if that. So the whole economics have changed. But we could see that we were going to be creating an advantage to lots of solar owners if we could get rid of these 0 and 3 kilowatt limits. And we needed to do a wholesale reform of the rules in order to do that. That's the answer to that one. What's next? Next slide, please. Oh, okay. So then the rule change process. We had a year of consultations before it formally started, and then another year that ended in July. Massive stakeholder involvement, lots of workshops, lots of haggling, lots of politics involved. But this is the Australian Energy Market Commission's explanation of the nuts and bolts of the final rule. And I thought it was better to hear it from them than from me because they're the ones that are ultimately responsible. And they've got a video with some music on it. So take it away, please. It really doesn't matter if we don't have sound, because there's no talking. Great, thanks. Can we move the slides along? And one more, keep going. No. More. Okay, so that's what the final rule looks like. Here's what difference I think we made to being part of the process. Throughout the whole process, there was this tendency on the part of the rule makers and the regulators and the networks to say, yeah, this is all about the cost that solar causes to networks, and we need to recover that cost from them so that we don't have to recover it from non-solar owners. And I kept saying to them, it's not just a cost, it's also a benefit. Like there are benefits to exporting some energy at different times and in different places. And it's not primarily solar in the middle of the day. It's solar early and late, and it's battery energy late, and it's electric vehicle energy late. And we need to recognize that we're moving from this one-way to a two-way grid, and that the services are being provided in both directions. And therefore, it's not just a case of recovering costs, it's a case of rewarding the benefit that renewable energy at the local level delivers. There are a couple of concrete things that we got in the final determination, which were not there in the draft. And the first one was the removal of complete export ban. So no longer can networks just unilaterally impose a zero export limit. They have to offer something, and they have to justify what the minimum is that they'll offer. And the other one is, we argued that where there was going to be a tariff, that there should be optionality, that you opt into this kind of export tariff if you think it'll work for you, if you think you can make money from it. But if you don't, you could choose to stay with what you've got now. And they kind of adopted that. The final rule says you can't mandate anyone to go onto an export tariff for 10 years from 2024. But if you choose not to take up an export tariff, you might be export limited to the lowest level, a couple of kilowatts. So if you're on 5 or 6 at the moment, you might be kind of throttled back to 2. It's not ideal, but it's better than being forced onto a tariff that you have to end up paying for. So I feel like it was the right decision for us to be inside the tent, and we significantly influenced the final result. I think we've got one more slide, and then we'll take some questions. Okay. There was a very strong campaign against the reform, and I completely understand all the reasons why people were campaigning against it. But I'm sure this will come up in the questions and answers, but we think that it's not a tax for several reasons. It's not, as I said, till 2034, it won't be mandatory. There are ways you can benefit, especially if you've got the ability to use your own solar energy during the day, or if you can, if you're installing new panels, install them on the west instead of facing north, or if you put in a battery, and you're not just avoiding the charge for consuming energy in the evening peak, but if you can export that, you'll find there are significant rewards for it. There's lots of ways in which this is not really a tax, but the last ditch effort on behalf of opponents is to now lobby state governments to stop networks from imposing any kind of tariff, whether it's positive or negative. And they will probably have some success in Victoria, but it's not looking very likely in other states at the moment. So the last slide before we go to questions is around what we're doing. And if you're a similar vintage to me, you'll understand what's meant by keep the bastards honest. But for younger people in the audience, it's about keeping people in power accountable for their actions. And we want to make sure that networks don't just impose these kind of tariffs unilaterally, that they only do it where there's a need. And they have to justify to the regulator that, first of all, solar exports in the middle of the day, if they're going to have a tariff, are causing extra costs. And secondly, that these costs can't be, are not trivial and can't be dealt with very simply by things like changing the transformer settings that will make over voltage less of a problem. So they've got to be significant costs. And then also that non-solar owners don't benefit from spending that money. And that's called the net market benefit test. And where everyone benefits from the export of solar energy, then networks can recover the cost from everyone. But where it's mostly the solar owner who benefits, then it's fair that it's the solar owner who should bear any increase in costs. So this is an example of the way the tariffs might work. Basically, if you're exporting in the middle of the day, you might be charged 1 or 2 cents a kilowatt hour if they can justify that it's costing them money. But you can offset that, and it may equalise, or it may work out in the end to be to your financial benefit if you've got a battery, because you'd be getting a significant reward for the evening peak hour if you can pump that battery energy back into the grid, and you could end up square or better. So there is potentially a net benefit there. So this is the job of people like me, is to kind of work on the nuts and bolts of how this stuff is getting implemented to make sure that we look after existing solar owners and new solar owners as much as possible. I think we can go to questions now. Lisa, thanks.
Okay. So yes, there's been some interesting ones come in. I've never heard of gravitricity. Can I ask a question about that? So this is from Alex. Is gravitricity gaining traction in Australia? Is there potential for transitioning old coal mines, etc., to utilise gravity as a battery force? Can gravitricity be utilised at a smaller local scale? Is this something you know more about, Mark?
Not really. We use gravity in pumped hydro. So, you pump energy up to a reservoir when it's cheap to do so, and then you let it drop down with the force of gravity to take advantage of high prices in peak times. That's going to be a much bigger part of Australia's energy mix in the future. But just no, gravity, I've never seen anything commercialised on that.
Okay, well, there's a link we can...
Can we focus on...
I think your question has been answered. You asked about what's the sun tax mentioned in the title of the talk. I think I'm having audio problems. Am I? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So yes, the sun tax was addressed by Mark. Linda has asked, if it's widely agreed the grid is inadequate, has it been analysed to identify the parts that need the most urgent upgrades?
That's a very big question. The grid is not inadequate. It's a really great shared resource that we have spent hundreds of millions of dollars, probably it's worth about $100 billion at the moment. And I think it's important to utilise it as much as possible. All the focus in the public domain is pretty much on transmission scale augmentation. So building all these big wind farms and solar farms in renewable energy zones that are going to require more transmission lines. But the distribution network, so close to home, is already there. It's not fully utilised, and it's going to be very cheap to utilise better. And this is what this kind of reform is intended to do, to make better use of what we've got now at low cost.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So Joe, who I know from the Central Coast Renewable Energy Group, has asked, how do we make sure that these extra fees, the tariffs you're talking about, are used properly and not just become income for the retailers?
Okay, so first of all, it's a network tariff, not a retail tariff. Retailers can pretty much charge what they like, and it's up to us as consumers to switch if we don't like it. They could, put up the prices independent of what these tariffs involve. But as far as the networks go, this is not going to increase the amount of money that they earn. This has been made quite clear by the energy regulator, which is part of the ACCC. It's about how you divide up the pie. It's about how they recover their costs. So they're not going to be incurring more costs. They're just going to be able to recover the costs more directly from the people who they consider have caused those costs, if the networks can make that case.
Mm-hmm. And John's question that you forwarded to us earlier, I think that's really been addressed too, but it was, is it true that as of 2024, we will be charged for exporting energy to the grid? And you've said that it's coming in, there's a 10-year period, but it won't be
that's right.
Mandatory, so you can avoid paying it. Is that right? Yeah. If you don't sign up to a plan, and you can make a sort of informed decision. I mean, it's quite complicated in a way, isn't it, Mark? Where when you have solar and you're wanting to sell it, you're becoming a supplier in a system. It's yeah, there's some things to understand, aren't there?
Well, that's right. And this is a very small impost and potentially a small reward if you've got a battery. It's a much bigger impact on the economics of your system if you've had to deal with fluctuating feed-in tariffs, because they've gone from, average 15
20,
cents,
yeah, down to 5.
yeah, 15, 20, down to about 5. And that's going to be the way it is from now on, as far as I can tell. So you really don't want to be installing solar anymore with the hope of making a lot of money out of pumping it into the grid.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, but it's going to make calculating the sort of payback time much more complicated, isn't it? Because you have to sort of yeah, it'll be up to a lot of what you choose in terms of when you sell your surplus. Yeah, so I guess that kind of brings us to Cynthia's question that we parked earlier. We have 4.5 kilowatts of PV panels. Is it now time for us to include a battery? Would that be better for both us and the system?
Well, bearing in mind that you're not going to be forced onto one of these new tariffs, possibly not, if you're doing it for financial reasons. But if you're doing it for environmental reasons and you're going to be there for a long time, then possibly yes, because we've got too much of a good thing in terms of midday solar now. And we've got in the wholesale market often negative prices. So solar, big solar farms, we're very happy that they're being built, but often now, especially in South Australia, they're just being turned off because they can't compete against rooftop solar. Yeah. So you can't have too much of a good thing. So storing it and using it in the evening, I mean, if you remember that day in the life of the NEM that we looked at earlier with the different fuel types, you've got no solar, you may have some wind, but until we get a lot more wind, you're going to be getting most of your energy from coal. So if you can avoid that kind of overnight usage, then you're doing the environment a good thing.
And is that going to change though, Mark, as coal, we hope, is going to become less of a thing, and we're going to, like, is the whole system going to change, and that whole coal, black and brown coal, is going to become less in the whole system?
Yes, we're seeing, first of all, black coal plants, or both black and brown coal plants, exiting the market earlier than anticipated, and that will continue just because of the market dynamics, because solar and wind are so much cheaper, even without any government intervention. So that's a good thing. But
so there'll be some more demand then, won't it? That the solar can help fill that gap.
Not solar, but wind.
Okay.
If it's overnight.
Okay, it's the overnight bit when we're needing it, or we're selling it back from our batteries.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So the other question we parked, electric vehicles and battery storage. Why are there hardly any vehicles with software that allows reverse flow to the home or grid?
Okay. Can we go to, I think, the very second last slide, Morose? Second last slide. Oh, sorry. So it's the one after that. Yeah. Okay, vehicle to grid. So at the moment, yes, your electric car can be charged from the grid, but it can't put energy back into the grid. That's something that's been available in Japan through Nissan since the Fukushima nuclear crisis in 2012. They realized that there was a need for greater energy resilience, and this is one way to do it, providing more flexibility. And I can see the potential, for instance, in bushfire areas, if you've got a car that's got an electric car that's got vehicle to grid, not only do you not have to go and fill up at the petrol station, I mean, assuming you're fully charged when the fire hits, often petrol stations go down. You can help others, you can help your neighbours, because the average electric car has a capacity of about 50 kilowatt hours, which is about 3 times the average daily household consumption. So you've got the equivalent of a big home battery on wheels there. There's a trial going on in Canberra at the moment around adapting this system for Australia with Nissan Leafs, but more generally, it's going to take a couple of years, maybe up to 2025 before we have the right standards in place. The other problem is that you need a different wall charger. You need a two-way wall charger. And at the moment, they're about $10,000. So until they come down, there's really not much point in doing it. In the short term, though, there are two other options. One is vehicle to load, which is basically you just have like an ordinary power socket in the car. So if there's a blackout, you could back your car up to the front door, run an extension cord, and power your, fridge and freezer, for instance. And there's an increasing number of cars have got that, like the new Hyundai Ioniq 5. The other one is vehicle to home, which means that you're not going into the grid and you don't have to kind of comply with all the safety and technical standards of a grid-connected battery. So that will happen quicker and easier also than vehicle to grid. But yeah, within a few years, every car owner, every car maker is going to have to offer it because every buyer is going to want it.
Yeah, I can see the benefits of the vehicle to load. That's definitely
camping, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, charging everything. Yeah. And that's different. That's like a plug-in, a PowerPoint option, not just a cigarette lighter kind of thing.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. Now we've got a couple more questions here. I'll just go back to, so Joe has questioned your comment about batteries. He disagrees and said domestic batteries do nothing for the environment as long as we have a high level of fossil fuels in the grid.
No, if you're charging your battery from renewable energy, then discharging it at a time when otherwise that demand would be met by coal or gas plants, then you are having a net environmental benefit.
Okay. Now, Cynthia said, what are the pros and cons around setting up local microgrids, and what kinds of organisations can or are doing that now?
Okay, big one. A microgrid is just a small grid, nothing special about it. There's a lot of isolated microgrids in Australia already, especially in rural Western Australia and the Northern Territory and mining camps and some Indigenous communities. They're just technically a little bit tricky, especially in terms of meeting your peak demand needs. So it's a bit like having your own off-grid system, but on a larger scale. You've got to have a very large solar system and a very large battery to meet, especially the battery, to have enough supply there to cater for, say, 5 days of bad weather. So part of the challenge of microgrids is around the technical needs of creating a grid that's in balance on a local level. But the other part of it is just having enough supply there. It's one of the few good things that the current federal government has done is, I think it's put about $50 million into microgrid trials around Australia. One of which in the Daintree has even included hydrogen, because they have long periods of the year when they don't get enough sun. So even a solar-based microgrid isn't going to work. So I think they're trialling hydrogen there. So they've got a lot of potential. The other potential for microgrids is islandable. So neither part of the main grid full-time nor off-grid full-time, but islandable means that they can go off-grid when they need to. So a town like Malakuta in Gippsland, which was badly affected by the bushfires, if they'd have been on a microgrid which could have been cut off from the main grid, they could have kept the power going for a couple of weeks when they didn't have power. So there's a lot of work going on in that space.
Okay. No, that's good. We need, what would that kind of vehicle, okay. So this is a question about a vehicle that you're draining the power back out of the battery. Would that kind of vehicle use wear out the battery quickly? Like, what's the lifespan of these batteries? Is it going to live to the warranty? What's going to happen to them end of life? Yeah,
that's the fear. That's why manufacturers other than Nissan have not done it up to now. But batteries in cars are performing a lot better than anyone expected. And there's plenty of first generation Nissan Leafs, which are only now, after what, nine or 10 years, needing a battery pack replacement. So, the battery chemistries will have to be fine-tuned for this purpose, but batteries that are well designed and well made should be able to handle it. As far as the end of life stuff goes, that is a real challenge at the moment. I think we just started the first recycling plant in Australia for batteries from EVs. But the other thing you can do with EV batteries when they're used up, so you don't want a battery in your car when it's dropped below about 80% of capacity over time. It might lose 1 or 2% per year. Once it gets to 80, it's kind of a bit of a slug to carry around, but it can be repurposed as a home battery, and there are people that can do that as well.
Okay, yeah, that's one of the questions that's come here. Can we repurpose spent EV batteries to use as community batteries or grid scale batteries? Is this technically feasible? Thanks, Emma.
It's new. The other thing I was going to say about batteries is that it's about the chemistry of the battery, and there's a lot of, even with lithium ion, there's a lot of different chemistries, and there's a lot of research being done into batteries which are, first of all, easier and less environmentally destructive to make in the first place because they don't use rare earth minerals, for instance, and less complex manufacturing processes with all sorts of toxic products. And so I've forgotten where I was going with that one, but anyway, we can expect that they're going to get more environmentally sustainable over time, but it's kind of early days at the moment.
Yeah, I noticed that the EPA or a federal grant, there's a grant out at the moment, I think it's state government, as part of their sort of circular economy plan. There's funding, millions of dollars of grants available for people to come up with recycling systems for photovoltaic panels and batteries. So they're trying to put some money towards development of these technologies. So I hope there's some good applications, and we hear of more projects starting up. So it's certainly going to be a big issue as all of our solar panels come to end of life.
It's already more of an issue with PV panels than it is with batteries, because a lot have been installed that were very bad quality, because unfortunately most Australians just go for the cheapest quote. Yes. And they've got very poor quality PV systems, and a lot of them have failed. Well, not a lot of them. It's still a fairly low rate. It's about 1 or 2% per year within the warranty period, which is quite long. But recycling those is more difficult because they're so low price to begin with. There's not a lot of value in them. Yeah. There is some recycling happening, but I'm not too clear on how it works.
Well, that's something that I do the waste campaigning. I'll be keeping an eye on that, and I know Jeff has certainly got his finger on the pulse of e-waste issues. So there's a good question here from Catherine. I'm not sure what SHASA stands for, but it says SHASA partnered with ANU, Australian National University, to secure a $3.1 million to develop 8 microgrid feasibility studies in the Eurobodalla South Coast, New South Wales region. So, that probably sounds, anyway, feel free to put in the comments what SHASA stands for, Catherine, that'd be great.
It's actually called the SURF project.
Okay.
Which is a kind of one of those acronyms that was designed to make it into a nice word, the word being SURF.
Okay.
Quite convoluted. I can't
yes. Okay, so the SHASA one is South Coast Health and Sustainability Alliance.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I don't know about that one.
Yeah, so that's good. And then she's also let us know that Re-Electrify in Melbourne have the Revolve battery bank of 120 kilowatts using old Nissan Leaf batteries.
Great.
Yeah, so some good projects happening. I'll just scroll down.
EV uptake has been so low in Australia that it's really hardly economic for anyone to start up a recycling plant at this point. But we'll have to, as we scale up our adoption of EVs, which we need to do given that transport contributes about 17% of our carbon emissions, and they're increasing.
Yes.
And we don't even have vehicle emission standards.
I know we're so far behind Europe and other countries, aren't we? It's quite embarrassing. So there's another question from Joe. How do I, as a consumer, actually see this solar fee or tariff? Because my invoice comes from the retailer and does not show network charges. So will that be itemised on our bills?
That's a really, really, really good question. And it's something that those of us in the sector bang our heads against all the time, because we want that kind of visibility. But retailers don't want to give you that visibility because they think that it's too confusing for you. It'll hurt your poor little heads.
They don't do us the credit, do they?
Well, even without this added level of complexity, bills are very confusing often anyway. So I think there will be retailers who specialise in this kind of product because they know that they've got customers with solar who want to take advantage of these kind of differential tariffs. So, you know, ones that charge during the day and reward in the evening, for instance.
Yeah.
There will be retailers who will flag up front this kind of tariffs because they know that you can make money from it.
Okay, so it might be like the power shops and the Diamond Energies of the world who'll make that more transparent than some of the other big ones.
And Amber and Energy Locals and maybe Innova.
Yeah. Okay. And it's a good question. Linda's just asked about how would we find the link to any of that PV recycling information. So maybe Mark and I can touch base with that, and we'll put that in your information that we send out after the workshop.
Sure.
We'll find that out and try and include what we can in your post workshop info. So we're down to the last 3 minutes now. So any other last chance of a question for Mark? And I think we've done a good job answering. I'll just do a scan up to the top. Is there anything that I've missed? Oh, so we didn't answer the one we got before the event. Sorry about that. That was and so I haven't got the name of who asked this, but I know it was sent in advance. I live in a strata scheme of 35 units. Can we have more campaigns and information for the 1 million people that live in strata blocks in New South Wales? Our block has solar thermal for hot water. We have used Watt Block consultants who specialise in strata units. They advised that it would not be economical to go for maximum solar potential on our rooftop. One of the big problems is that strata organisations cannot sell power to the individual lot or apartment owners.
Yeah, I'm not clear about that last point. I did read this email and reply to it. I'm not aware of what the legislative problem is there. It's not one that's to do with the electricity rules, so it must be something to do with the state.
Yeah, it's a shame it can't be done like a microgrid, because I assume in a microgrid, it sells to individual houses within it.
Yeah. Technically, it can be done. And there are companies or organisations which specialise in this sort of scheme, and the best known is called Solshare, SOLSHARE. They developed a software that will enable rooftop solar in an apartment building to be shared amongst all the owners. If that's too difficult, the easiest thing to do with an apartment building, and especially if you haven't got a large roof, is just to use that to install a solar system which can power up the common areas. And that's not just kind of lobby lighting and security systems and downstairs parking, but increasingly might involve powering EV chargers in the basement as well. So there is still some potential, even if you can't sell it to the individual apartment owners.
Okay. That's great. We've made a note. So we've been making notes on as much as we can of all these great answers we're getting from Mark, and we will do our best to put those into a little question and answer information that we'll send out to you as well. Yeah, that's great. I've got...
Lisa, can I just ask if if there's stuff that we haven't touched on that you want to know about, that could be the subject of another webinar, please let us know. Because we didn't cover off on some of our other work, which was community scale batteries and resilience, and some of the other work we're doing on electric cars as well.
Yeah. So maybe yes, pop a note in the chat now, or maybe you filled out the Google form survey. Actually, we were going to share that in the chat to say the other topics that you'd like covered in another webinar. I think yeah, if you're interested in more webinars, please give us a thumbs up or put a yes please into the comments in the chat. If there's some other topic we haven't touched on, feel free to put it in there now, because we haven't got time to do it now so we've reached the end of our webinar. But yeah, we'll definitely be looking at ways we can do this again and engage with you all. And it's been fantastic to have you all here with us. Any last words from Mark or Marius or Jeff?
Not for me. Thanks very much for participating. I hope we
Thank
can do
you,
it again.
Mark. Thanks very much. That's great. Jeff or Marius, would you like to say anything else to finish? We're getting some thank yous in the chat there, Mark. Thanks, and yes, please, for another webinar. So,
I would like to say thank you, everyone. Because we said at the beginning, it's a complex piece of architecture, the national electricity market. And without NGOs working in it and outside it in terms of campaigns and media, it becomes the sole property of the old style energy grid. So it's very important that we continue to participate and put pressure on it. So it's one of those weird TC campaigns that we took on, well, almost 20 years ago, and it's been a hard slog, but eventually we're now getting through. Thank you, everybody.
thank you. Good
Thanks.
night.
Thank you all for joining.